Hi, I'm Cara, and this is the Whodunnit podcast.
Where we look at unsolved cases throughout history and say, oh, who did it?
Who done it?
Who done it? Who must have done it?
Done it.
That's very important, and that's like kind of the thing behind every murder case. Like that's what we are here to figure out today with all of you
Interesting.
lovely
unsolved.
people at home, in the bus,
In the bus.
wherever
In the car,
wherever
in
you
the
listen,
bath.
wherever you listen to your podcast. I don't think anybody has like preference. You know what? We're getting off topic. How about I tell you and everybody else what we're going to talk about today?
Sure.
We're going to talk about the murder of one Julia Wallace in 1931. It was quite a grisly murder, very complicated, very confusing. So let's kind of just lay out the facts to begin with. On the night of the murder, Julia was at home when suddenly her husband comes back and finds her dead with multiple skull wounds, fractured skull wounds to the head. Basically, this episode, we are going to talk about who are the leading suspects to have killed her. And why has this case stuck around for so long? You'll find it's because it's actually mental, it's confusing, and it's complex, and there's so much to it, it's insane.
Yeah, because it's like almost 100 years old.
Yep, people still talk about it. This is one of the cases that are defining in Liverpool's history. Like, this is something that is very established in the minds of many. So let's think about who the main suspect was at the time, the person that went on trial for her murder, her own husband, William Wallace. And he was someone that people had a lot of respect for. They called him, he was a family man, he loved his wife, he was very much a kind and compassionate person. That was kind of the reputation that people had of him. He was a businessman. He would basically go about, and it was a very odd job that doesn't exist anymore, where he would go and basically be your friend. In ways, he would show up at people's weddings as like a designated best man type role. So
That is a strange job.
it is strange. It's like, did people not have friends back then?
People didn't have friends.
People didn't have
so
friends.
they hired
They had to
William
make them.
Wallace.
Yeah.
So how did he become a suspect?
Let's start from this. Often when people that are murdered are married, the first suspect is often their spouse, because they're
Yeah.
just that close to them. It's quite, I mean, this might be shocking to say, but they're the easiest suspect to go for.
Well, I mean, they always do say that it's probably somebody you know.
Aye, and I mean, have we not heard, obviously, we don't like to trade in tropes here at Whodunnit, but the husband did it is always, like, you hear that.
Yeah.
You hear that a lot. People
Yeah, it's
say
quite-
shit.
it's quite
People
common.
say stuff like that. The husband was an initial such suspect, right? Because there wasn't much of a way that he couldn't have done it. Like, it made too much sense to them at the time.
So how is he suspected?
Well, basically what happened was he gave his alibi because he says he was nowhere near the house at the time of the murder. So obviously it was like he couldn't have done it.
Right.
But his alibi, it's utterly confusing, and although all the facts support him in this case, it is still very odd. It's he was scheduled to have this business meeting at a place that didn't exist, and a man who phoned him who also didn't exist. There was two fake names and fake places given to him, and that's where he went the night of the murder.
Do we think that he made it up or he was given that information?
Well, here's what's interesting. That's what happened. The police said he's making it up. This can't be true.
Right.
Because they traced the call to the location. It was minutes from the Wallace's house. So their kind of instant assumption is, oh, he must have made this up. He must have just done this to get himself out of it.
Yeah.
But honestly, from the night of the murder, the police basically were like, this guy's guilty. This is him, you know?
How could they put all of that onto him? What if, like, it was somebody else and maybe they gave a fake name?
Well, they thought to themselves that William Wright, he's a smart man, he's an educated man, He's a businessman. You know, he's very capable. And so, obviously, after doing this, his first thought would be, I need to give myself an alibi, a reason I can't be there when the murder has happened. So they thought to themselves, he's lying. There's no way that he isn't lying. Their real thing was that they thought he did it. You know, they were unquestionable in that regard. They wouldn't ask questions unless the answer had led to that he did it.
But how do they think he did it?
Well,
if he had an alibi?
Their belief was in this absolutely ridiculous story that somehow he killed his wife, he cleared all the blood off himself, and then he went and staged a fake robbery because they'd found that a collection box upstairs had been ransacked and took out of.
Right, okay.
So they believe that first of all, he goes in, he kills his wife, he cleans himself of all the blood somehow, and then he goes up and stages this fake robbery in the span of 10 minutes.
That's so far-fetched.
It's really...
That's a little bit, ridiculous.
It's almost impossible.
I mean, could they not have thought, maybe there was a second person? If they were going to blame the husband, why didn't they think maybe he was in cahoots with somebody else? Because surely he couldn't have done that by himself.
I mean, that was never something that came up as a possibility for them.
No.
They looked into other people, of course, but as we'll get onto later, but there was never really a desire to put him next to anyone as an accomplice. To be honest with you, though, the police work in this case is actually atrocious. It's quite sloppy.
Right.
With someone had flushed a toilet that had been found to have had blood on it. That's ridiculous. You would never get away with that in...
Somebody from the police flushed a toilet that had blood?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, no. And they had also suppressed evidence as well. They were undermining witness testimonies, trying to get them to match their story, their theory. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, we all know that prosecutions and all that, they want the person... They don't want them to be guilty, but they want to find the case as guilty.
Yeah, prove
So
them.
They'll do whatever has to be done in some cases, and that was what had happened. But ultimately, it didn't really work. William was acquitted when he went to trial because but the jury voted, they found him guilty and they sentenced him to death. But the judge overturned it because there was no evidence. There was no substantial evidence. It was just a very good
So
case.
If they weren't going to sentence him and the judge overturned it, who were they going to sentence?
Well, nobody. That's kind of how that went. There was no real formal investigation into anyone else.
Was there any other suspects?
Oh, there was, but I think there's a bit more on William, to be honest, to go through first.
Okay.
Basically, even the forensic report that came out kind of clears William's name, because it states that Julia's death was about 10 to 8. Mm-hmm. William had left the house to go to this business meeting. I think it was around 6 to half 6. It was nowhere near the time of death. Mm-hmm. So it makes absolutely no sense.
So he was gone. He was out the door.
Oh yeah, he was sighted. He was spotted. There's no getting around the fact that he was spotted. It doesn't make sense. As judge, obviously decreed, it doesn't make sense to say that he murdered her. There's a few points that we've gotten into, but it just doesn't add up. You know?
Yeah. So if he wasn't a convincing suspect, was it anybody else, or was it just him?
Basically, after Richard was acquitted of the murder, he went and gave multiple interviews on the matter, and he had pinpointed Richard Parry as he was sure that Richard Parry had done it. He was sure that he'd committed the murder because he was one of a short list of men that would be let into the house without question, and that he would have used this position to murder Julia.
Right. But do we think that he had any motive, or?
Well, basically, he was a reasonable suspect because obviously he had the ability. He could have done it. Mm-hmm. He was, he was. I don't mean to be sexist, but he was a man. He was a big man. She was a woman. It's there was something physically there that he could use. What had happened that caused friction between William and Richard was that William had caught Parry cooking the books at their job. Basically, swindled them, stole from them.
Oh.
And obviously Richard was his supervisor. No, William was Richard's supervisor, sorry.
Richard was stealing from William.
Yeah. Well, no, he was stealing from the job. He didn't steal from him, but what William did was he went and reported it.
Right. Okay.
So they quickly then either left or were fired following an investigation. Yeah, no. So the motive really here is that what happened. The kind of accusation is that Richard had taken revenge against William and murdered him, and that's why he stole the collection book, because he felt it was owed to him.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there are questions that are kind of like unanswered here, because it's like, why would Richard steal what was ultimately less than £5? It was £4.
Really?
It was just £4.
The jewellery box.
Yeah, the jewellery. But it wasn't even jewellery. It was like just pennies.
Oh.
And they were stolen, and it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's like you don't.
It's not worth murdering a woman.
Yeah,
over.
you don't kill a person for a £5. You know what I mean? Well, you don't kill a person for 5,000, 5 million. You don't do that either. But you know what I mean, right? It's like.
It's in the end, like if you were gonna kill somebody for money, it wouldn't be over £5.
Yeah, exactly. It'd have to be something a lot more substantial.
That's a bit weird.
So Perry, while he wasn't a massive suspect by any means, there was no trial against him or anything like that. He was put in for questioning about the circumstances that led to the murder. And it's actually kind of shocking. He knew what chess club William had went to, and at this chess club, that was where the call was made that for William to go to this business meeting. Obviously, it didn't exist.
So they phoned William from the chess club?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Basically, William was at the chess club. He received this mysterious call from someone that knew he'd be there and knew that he would go and accept this meeting or whatever had happened.
That's strange, though, to accept a meeting right then and there.
Obviously, that could be, like, you could argue that as a reason why maybe William did do it. Like, maybe he did make up, like, obviously, there's quite a lot of evidence to the contrary when it comes to William. Like, there's no actual hard evidence that anyone did this, to be honest with you. But what I'd say as well is that Parry did admit to the police that he knew what times and what days William would be at the chess club.
Yeah.
Like, he just knew this somehow. Like, they were colleagues, but they weren't close, if you get what I mean. Like, and I think in those days, it was more common for, like, colleagues to just go by your house.
So it would make sense for Parry to phone the chess club at that certain time.
Yeah. And
send William on this, like, goose chase.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But, like, what did Parry say he was doing at the time? Like, what was his alibi? Did he have one?
Well, here's the strange part about Parry's story. He gave 2 alibis to the police. He did not give one, he gave 2. And both completely contradicted each other. Right. There was one account where he was basically saying, I was with my girlfriend the whole day, and then I left to go, I think it was like to a bar or something. And this alibi made sense. And it was supported by the girl herself, who was like, he was with me during the time of the murder. He couldn't have done this.
Yeah.
But then when he was pressed by police, he gave an utter, like, it was very much like nonsense. What Perry had done basically was he gave this other alibi to the police that was nonsensical, basically saying he was going back and forth from place to place all the time, which was a problem, because it's like, you can't give 2 separate accounts of what you did.
Yeah,
like, you know what you did.
I mean, like, if your first one was like, a solid alibi and you were going to be fine with it, why would you then give a second one?
Well, that's the thing.
Unless guilty conscience.
Actually, it was the order of the alibis isn't really known as to what he gave him.
Right.
And you'd imagine it was a nonsensical one first, but of course, I feel like in any sort of high stress situation, it's likely that people would slip up, including even murderers, you know. But inevitably, like, it is a matter of opinion what version of events you believe in all this. Like, there's no definitive, he did it, Perry did it, but, like, there's no definitive Perry did it.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone could firmly go out and say, this guy, he did it. Because obviously there's still questions.
Yeah, because, like, if he committed this crime, why would he then steal the money? Why would he kill Julia in the first place? If he was going to get back at Wallace, surely he would have killed Wallace.
Well, there was this. I feel like it was this like old school version of chivalry. It was basically like, "Oh, you hurt me, I'll hurt your woman." You know what I mean? It's this very
I mean,
weird,
it was like 1930s, so.
You know, it's basically like it's just an odd kind of. It was an odd way of looking at it, but it was how they looked at it. You know.
What kind of like, but how many questions are still unsolved?
Well, here's the thing: whoever made the call, let's assume that they were the murderer, because here's the thing: we don't know that they did it. Obviously,
it could have been
it's
some
very
sort of
likely.
like scream tactics, you know, like one of them's the murderer, one of them's on the phone, like the Scream movies.
Damn, I don't know about that. I mean, Ghostface, like that. I don't think that would have like that's. I don't imagine that happened. There was no real event. Like there was no story. There's no version of the story where it was an accomplice. You know, there's no two-man. Of course, that's a good theory. I think obviously because I think something complicated like this, it becomes a lot more explainable.
It seems quite complicated for 1930.
Exactly. And it suddenly gets a lot more explainable when you put in the idea of two. Here's some problems with the whole thing. Why did the murderer make the assumption that William would fall for the bogus call? Like, let's be quite honest with ourselves here. It's like the 2024 equivalent of like, not 1930s equivalent of like scam calling. You know what I mean? It's you know, obviously back then, I feel like everybody took each other at their word a lot more when it came to stuff like this, phone related or whatever. So, and he saw an opportunity for business, so it is reasonable as to why he went and tried to find this place.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it must have been so much harder to like physically make a phone call and get William on the other end of the phone.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like everybody now has got their own individual phones, but they didn't have that back then. Just had landlines.
Yeah, no, of course. And then, obviously, like, it's quite a flimsy way to, like, go about it at first. Like even at best case scenario, it's still kind of flimsy. Like, you don't understand why somebody would do this. And at worst, it's actually just ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like, why would you do that? And obviously, it makes no sense. It does make no sense that the murderer would steal £5. Like, less. If it's less, even, I think it was £4, it was less.
Which in today's money is like, what, 50 quid?
Aye, it's, like,
I mean,
it's still
I might be
not,
completely overshooting here. But that's still not enough money that you'd, like, kill somebody.
No, definitely not. No, it's a bit insane, to be honest with you. Basically, I feel like both suspects do make sense in some ways, but, like, there's other ways in which they do not at all. So I think that while we've had an interesting look at both suspects, I don't think I could say either of them were guilty.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, if you imagined, like, either person in that situation, you could go, yes, some things would then make sense, but also things are just a bit like, well, why? You know, you're still left with questions with both suspects. There is no definitive answer.
Yeah, no, of course.
So, but yeah, I think that is a bit nuts, especially I think the phone call is what gets me the most.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's like 1930s and nobody really has phones.
Yeah, no, it was an odd thing to happen. Of course, looking back, it's like, that kind of makes more sense nowadays. You know, that's like something you'd understand if it happened now.
But why has this case, like, stayed, not relevant, but it's like people are still aware of it, like it's remembered.
Well,
why is that?
People keep on coming up with new ideas and new interpretations of how it was done, and you know who could have done it. Even like 50 years on, I'm sure somebody came out and said they were a witness. It wasn't. Ultimately, there's no real proof of it, and there's quite a lot. There's some reports stating that the person that did come forward as a witness just doesn't like Parry. And wanted to discredit him. I feel like the reason why it's really still in the like conscience of people today is that it's just an enigma. It's a mystery and it's a puzzle that can't be solved, or maybe it can be.
I feel like if it happened nowadays, we might have been able to like solve it. Yeah. But with like the lack of like, I don't know, resources in that time, especially like. It must have been hard. It must have been frustrating as well. And I feel so sorry for that woman.
Oh, of course.
That, like, I mean, I guess that if her killer was caught, he probably would have been killed.
Yeah.
He'd been given the death penalty and hung.
Yeah, of
But
course.
also, like, for her killer then to not face any sort of justice, I feel sorry for her.
That is true. No matter what version of stories, like version of the events you believe, that is the final verdict.
Mhm.
Nobody suffered the consequences for what had
Yeah.
happened.
Mhm.
Nobody, like, it just didn't happen. You know what I mean? And it was a brutal murder. It was awful, and nobody faced justice. It's a shame. It's a real shame.
Somebody somewhere got away with it.
Yeah, it's just like last episode with Jack the Ripper. It's like nobody was found. You know, that's the whole reason why we're still here talking about it today.
Yeah.
And you know, you could argue that that's.
I mean, you could also argue that if somebody was caught, we wouldn't remember her.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose.
Because it
But-
would be a solved case and there'd be no mystery behind it if they figured it out.
I don't mean to get all deep, but like, do you want to be remembered for being murdered? You know what I mean? It's like. Nobody remembers.
I guess if you are murdered,
Yeah.
you might as well be remembered for something.
That's an interesting viewpoint, I'd imagine. And it's also, I imagine, it's quite a good point to end on. I think actually, this has been the Whodunnit podcast. I hope we gave you some idea of who might have done it, even though we don't know.
We don't know who
We
done it.
don't know who done it, and that's something that's, you know, obviously everybody's going to make their own mind up.
Maybe we've sparked new theories.
Maybe
hope
somebody
so.
maybe one of you will come up with the idea as to who might have done it. That's obviously big, high hopes.
High hopes.
High hopes,
High
but
hopes. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back next week.
yeah, like and subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts from. Bye bye. Ciao.